This drawing shows the assembly sequence that we've gone through, showing on the left side the preparation of the tube assembly through making the armature, the plaster master model, the plaster shells, the half shells, and the assembly of the tube. Down the center we see the casting of the hemisphere from the original globe, cleaning up of that hemisphere, the rotation of the trim lines, and then the layup of the upper tube assembly and the lower tube assembly. And then on the right we see the buildup of the bulkhead assembly, and then as that progresses down, the assembly of that bulkhead into the armature. And then in the lower assembly sequence, it shows how the hemispheres are assembled to the tube on the left, and then how the bulkhead assembly is then tied into the upper tube assembly. To accomplish that, the lower hemisphere was mounted back into the original master model or master hemisphere plaster, and then the top tube assembly was dropped in, and the edge of that plaster contained it and held it into a perfect sphere while that was laid up and secured. This drawing shows the whole assembly, showing the bulkhead, the relationship to the rest of the sphere assembly, the optical train, also the suction cup drive assembly, the way that would work, and the free vision viewfinder system. The mirror cell assembly was determined to be a slip-on C-ringing section that would protect the edge of the mirror. This is setting up again an armature on the turntable to make that form. Here we see that form has already been turned in plaster. We see the basic maximum diameter, which is for the disc itself, with a slight setback top and bottom for a return flange on both top and bottom. Here is another view of the part. It's been sealed and painted. It's ready for the fiberglass layup. In this case, fiberglass is wrapped completely around the part in continuous fibers, continuous circles, and then a band of steel was wrapped around it and held on with clamps to form the exterior surface. Here the completed fiberglass layup is shown having set and cured, and it's removed off the turntable spindle. The collar is removed here, showing the exterior surface. Since the part was trapped onto the tool, one bandsaw cut was made at one spot so that the part could be then sprung to a larger diameter and sprung off of the tool. This would be the same way that the actual mirror itself would be installed, and the whole edge would be protected. This is a view of the diagonal assembly of the design for the plan of making it. In the upper left hand shows the setup of small templates to make a plaster master model, and then from this master model the fiberglass shells would be taken. These shells would be trimmed and cut to fit the size and assembled on a aluminum tube assembly, and the spider diagonal assembly is also shown. Per the plan, the small templates were cut to size and then slipped inside of a tube assembly that was essentially the same diameter that the diagonal would be. This assembly was then jigged up onto the turntable so that I could turn a spherical pocket section at the very top, that this would be critical to the interface. This view shows the completed plaster with all the shapes and forms on it. This would be set up as a male plaster tool. The fiberglass would be laid up on top of that. Here it's all shown lacquered, waxed, and coated, ready for a fiberglass layup. The tape lines here note the trim lines. First, using very lightweight fiberglass, I made a layup of the spherical seat on top. This was followed by a fiberglass layup around the rest of the part, making a very lightweight shell structure. The fiberglass part was then wrapped with tape and then cast into a bucket of plaster. I really have no idea why I did this. This is the plaster plug pulled out of the tool. And this is the part shown removed from that tool. The exterior surface of the fiberglass shell, since that's the visible part, that's not normally the way I would work it, but I'm trying to control the inside diameter to match the exact diameter of the diagonal. So I'll just hand finish this. It's a small detail, it's not that much work to it. This is a good view of the diagonal holding shell as it's separated. I think I remember why I made that plaster cast. I was going to have to make a cut in the assembly to hold the diagonal mirror, and then put a return flange, and I had to have a fixture to line everything after it was cut. So that was the reason for the plaster tool, so it would slip back into that form while I'm doing all the layups, and it would maintain accuracy. Since there were some imperfections in the gel coat, and I had a lot of little flashes and details on the surface that needed to be cleaned up, I'm showing here block sanding the sphere to clean up the small imperfections. This of course meant that I eventually would have to paint the whole assembly. Meanwhile, a plaster was cast against the original female tooling for the sphere, and this was again modified similar to the other base to make a base assembly. Here the part has been fully waxed, polished out. A PVA parting agent coat has been applied, and then that was again waxed and then polished out. This is ready now to do the fiberglass layup. Here we have the white gel coat has been applied, and that's basically allowed to set intact. And then the assembly was completed. This is on Mount Pinos in June of 1971, when the telescope saw first light in basically a boilerplate configuration. But it was quite exciting. This is part of the finder assembly, which involved a 6-inch diameter simple plano convex lens, then mounted to this assembly. This is to create an image on a magnon mirror at the back side of the sphere that would give basically a floating aerial image with a 1-to-1 power of the skies. Not a lot of illumination, but the electrical stuff there, you can see a pocket for a rechargeable flashlight battery that I'd be able to slip in place and then hook in the connectors. What this provided for me was basically illumination for interior dome light, would give me a red light inside to the sphere in case I had to service the optics during a night of viewing. And also my finder assembly used a light source of a red crosshair in the field of view. That was actuated by a magnetic switch, which you can see at the very top of the assembly. This could be activated just by moving a magnet close to the top of the sphere in a particular location. This is a dry run checking out the optical system. You notice I'm looking down through that hole at the top of the telescope, looking at the magnon mirror at the bottom end of the sphere. That reflects back up to that housing assembly you just saw. And if you look right in that area where the opening is, you should see my eyes looking forward. That's essentially the exit pupil. Looking at the center of the sphere, you notice the opening, and you can see the magnon mirror and the view that it sees from that location, which is looking basically at right angles at the line of sight. When viewed from above the telescope position, that's the view that I got of the sky. This, of course, is in the daylight. In this view, you can see what the appearance is. You can see the eyepiece assembly at the forward end of the tube, which is very close to the line of sight. This is a nighttime view, which shows the crosshair assembly that could be lit up by that magnetic switch. In the center is a circle which represents the field of view of the eyepiece, and you can see there's a bright object, probably Jupiter, in the center of the field of view, and another star off to the side. This is the completed telescope as it was shown in Riverside in 1972, which had basically his first complete real public showing of any note. I was fortunate to get 4 first prize awards, first in mechanical ingenuity, optical, a couple of others, I think, overall. This was taken a couple of days later, my home in Sunland, Tahunga area. Yeah, later that evening I was able to run the clock drive and get it to work well. I had marginal success on and off with it, but it was working later that evening. This is a little bit later that evening. This is with the dome light on inside. Give me access to the sphere if I need any servicing. This is a view of the moon in the crescent phase with Venus in a very, very close proximity. That was on that same night. This is outside my home in Sunland, Tahunga area. The telescope was left outside with it all buttoned up for basically all-weather configuration, left out in the rain. This is a view of the 12-inch telescope out at the Los Angeles Astronomical Society viewing property up near Mount Pinos. Again, here's a cutaway view of the completed assembly. Except now that you've seen the other shots, a lot of this might make more sense. Later that summer in '72, I took the 12-inch to Stellafane, and this is arriving in the Springfield, Vermont area. There were some real pretty areas out there with the running water and the waterfalls and everything. This was a waterway going right through the middle of town, Springfield, Vermont. These are very, very pretty cascades. This is following very simple sign markers to the Stellafane site. Then the dirt road that takes up to the top of Breezy Hill where the Stellafane is located. This, of course, is the classic Stellafane clubhouse that Russell W. Porter designed. This was on the Friday afternoon before the weekend convention. That's Herb, my brother, in the foreground. He came out to enjoy the stay there. Here I have the 12-inch sitting out there. This is a early Saturday morning before the start of the convention. The telescope was left overnight out in the dew and the condensation. It's all locked up. All the portholes have individual locks on them, so it's all secure. Here you can see the condensation from the overnight dew that collected. The lower port on the opening is actually for a solar observing filter. I did use that partially during the daytime. As the day progresses, more and more people start showing up. The telescopes start getting set up. This is getting later towards the high noon. More and more scopes up there. The Tuttle 20-inch Cassegrain trailer portable is in the background. That's the same one that I saw there in '72. Excuse me, this is '72 at this time. That was when I saw there in '68. During the mid-afternoon, they had the judging, where the judges went around and people were looking at all the telescopes. This is a little bit later in the afternoon. I think by this time I had won the first place for mechanical ingenuity with my telescope. Later in the evening they do the optical judging. It's getting into the twilight period, and we started observing later in the evening. And I was fortunate later in the evening to get a second prize overall for optics. This is now a few years later at my home in Bonita, California, where I set up some observing pads, and here the 12-inch is set up at one of the upper level pads. The comfortable working bench off to the side. Another view of the same location, but viewed from a lower spot